because of copyright, I can't play any actual clips of these episodes. I'd give you a link to a copyright-free version, but I can't because of a stupid guideline, so just go to my Odyssey account and look up the video there if you want a version with actual episode footage. Alright everyone, it is great to be back! And now I can finally do my next countdown, the top 15 surprisingly dark episodes. Now I know some of you may think I'm crazy for doing a Halloween countdown in the middle of the winter. This would have been out by now, but I've just had multiple setbacks this past year. From last summer's computer issue, to my bad cold, to my microphone being extremely stupid, and especially the hacking incident. And I already delayed this a year and don't want to have to wait another year for another chance to do this, especially since I was really close to finishing this by the time the hacking incident happened. So I'm doing it now. And if you have a problem with that, then at least you can wait to watch this until this year's Halloween. I promise you guys this would have been out in November at the latest, if not for these previously mentioned setbacks. But enough about that. I don't want this video's late upload to be the only thing everyone talks about in the comments section. Now before we begin, I want to make one thing clear. This list isn't based on how dark these episodes are, but how dark they are compared to what we thought they'd be. So episodes of continuity shows that are part of a saga where the villain nearly destroys the world are definitely out, since the previous episodes made it clear that the stakes would be this high. With that said, let's get on with my Halloween countdown. 4 months late. Hearing Impaired from Penguins of Madagascar is an episode I think definitely belongs on this list. Not only is it dark, but the episode's beginning could give some the impression that this episode is going to be a very lighthearted episode, especially since the first joke of the episode is a poop joke. Anyways, in this episode, the penguins decide to go into a sunken fishing boat known as the SS Fiskenlucht, where they can get a lot of fish from. But unfortunately, Skipper, Kowalski, and Private decide to be completely obnoxious and eat all of them and don't let Rico have any. That is honestly way too mean-spirited and it really bothers me, but then again, considering what we soon learn, it's for the best that Rico didn't get any, because it is soon revealed that the fish they ate gave them a rare brain disease that will cause them to completely lose their minds and literally think of nothing but eating fish for 24 hours. Doesn't sound too bad, right? Just wait. Do you want to know the worst part? If they eat even one more fish during those 24 hours, they are literally stuck like that forever. And it can't be easy preventing this, considering how he's up against 3 other elite penguins, so I'd imagine that keeping all 3 of them from having a single fish would be near impossible. Just think about that. The thought of being in danger of permanently losing their minds to a rare brain disease, and that can happen from just one measly fish, which is also the very thing they're obsessed with at the moment, I don't think I can explain this any better than I already did. Grumpy Young Men from Jimmy Neutron. I know I've talked about this episode before in my Scariest Nostalgic Moments list, so you'll probably know why this is dark if you saw that video, or, you know, the actual episode, but I have to talk about it again for the sake of this countdown. For context of what happens, Jimmy, Sheen, and Carl all want to buy a new video game, but they aren't allowed to because it's for adults only. But Jimmy believes that he has the answer to that with his own new invention, the Metabolic Accelerator. But because he didn't use the correct amount of titanium needed in order to get it to work, it ages them way too much, causing them to turn to old men. That's already pretty terrifying on its own, losing probably about 60 years of your life. But it gets worse. Unless Jimmy is able to get the right amount of titanium and get the machine to work properly by 603, they will rapidly age and turn to dust. As I said last time I talked about this episode, these are actually children on the inside. Dying of old age is scary enough, but when it's happening to characters who are actually children on the inside, that is just horrible! The only way they can prevent this is to get the correct amount of titanium needed to power the machine. Sounds simple, until you realize that now that they're old and senile, they're having a hard time remembering what they need, thus significantly raising the risk of our heroes not making it in time. And it doesn't help that their old age makes them walk a lot slower, which will make it take even longer, giving them even less time to save themselves. Of course, they do make it in the end, but what happens in this episode? How could it not make the list? Ah, Cyber Chase. Back in the later years of my childhood, this show was up there with Thomas, SpongeBob, and Pokémon as one of my all-time favorite TV shows. And even though I stopped watching it many years ago, I've lately been considering coming back to it. I'm kinda nervous about it though, because I don't want people to think I'm weird. But considering how everyone was okay with me still liking Thomas with only one person actually judging me for it, hopefully they'll say the same about this too. I just hope I still like it, because I remember getting really weird at times. Anyways, despite being a show off PBS Kids, this show has notably higher stakes than most shows aimed at little kids. Unlike most PBS Kids or Nick Jr. shows where the stakes are stuff like, we need to get ready for a party, and we want to find out what Blue wants to do today, or stuff like that, this show has actual stakes. Actual lives are on the line this time. One particular example being the episode Clock Like an Egyptian. Yeah, pretty weird title, I know. Told you it had some weird things in it. Anyways, in this episode, Dr. Marbles gets trapped in a pyramid and now the kids have to save him. Yeah, they have to save him again. What else is new? Sounds like a pretty safe premise for an episode. Just go in, find Dr. Marbles, and get out. Simple, right? But there's a catch. You see, they're on a time limit. Because every minute, the door to the tomb lowers and lowers until it permanently shuts with them imprisoned inside it. The idea of our heroes facing the threat of being forced to spend the rest of their miserable lives rotting in some pyramid isn't exactly anything new. So what makes this any different? Because again, this is a PBS Kids show. PBS Kids shows normally have very lighthearted premises for episodes, so you wouldn't think it would have stakes like this. This would be a twisted fate for anyone. But when it's happening to children, I can't imagine how horrible that would be. Though it does kinda hurt the plot when our heroes spend way too long trying to find out how much time they have. If I'm counting right, they have about 20 minutes to accomplish their mission, yet they waste almost half that time. I mean, I won't deny that knowing how much time you have is important, but it's more important to actually have time to do this. And I also don't see why they can't just call Motherboard and have her send them a portal to help them escape if they don't make it out in time. Even as a kid I thought of that. Even so, that is still a dark thought, and it proves how Cyber Chase does have some dark moments in it. And I hope that's enough to make it okay for me to watch the show even as an adult. Oh yeah, and Digit straight up murders one of the villains at one point. Enjoy your nightmares, everyone. Speaking of shows that are aimed primarily at children but also have higher stakes than most little kids shows, Thomas. Despite being intended for younger audiences, it has quite a few surprisingly dark moments in it, including from the third episode of the entire show, The Sad Story of Henry, or Come Out Henry if you're watching the American dub, which is the one I like to stick with. But even though both versions are roughly the same just with a different narrator, there is one big difference in the second half. So for this one, we're going to be talking about the UK dub. The premise of this episode is that Henry decides to stop in a tunnel out of fear that the rain will ruin his green paint. Even though I'm pretty sure his paint is already dry, so I don't know what he's complaining about. So, as you've probably expected, Henry's refusal to come out of the tunnel is getting in the way of him doing his job. Everyone tries everything they can to move him out of the tunnel, but no matter what they do, he doesn't move an inch. So eventually Sir Topham Hatt, the head of the railway, decides that they have to do things the hard way. By taking away Henry's rails and leaving him there for always and always and always. Yep, you just heard right. Sir Topham Hatt is actually going to leave Henry there for the rest of his miserable existence. That is a horrible thing to do, to just leave him there to rot for all eternity. I know that Sir Topham Hatt isn't necessarily a tyrant like some people believe he is, but with his cruel behavior in this episode, I don't blame people for thinking he is one, especially since this is the episode that introduces us to him. And because of the fact that this is actually how the episode ends, I'm pretty sure that a lot of children would literally cry after watching this. And the narrator actually has the audacity to say that Henry deserved it. No, he didn't. Yes, Henry was in the wrong for what he did. Yes, he deserves a punishment. But not like this. This is just sick and twisted to do to pretty much anyone. Now, it's not any higher on the list for two reasons. The first reason is because he actually does get let out in the next episode when he is needed again. And the other reason is because, as stated before, there is a big difference between the UK and American dubs. That being that Sir Topham Hatt's dialogue is simply changed to, "We shall take away your rails and leave you there until you're ready to come out of the tunnel." That is a much more reasonable punishment than the one he got in the UK version, especially since they actually make it clear that his punishment is not necessarily permanent. But the UK version, however, does not promise anything of the sort. Yes, he still gets let out in the next episode, but people watching this one won't have any way of knowing that. It is true that there are other surprisingly dark episodes in the show, but what makes this even more surprisingly dark is the fact that, like I said, this was only the third episode of the show, so people would have less of a reason to expect such a dark ending. since the worst that happened up to this point in the show was Thomas getting exhausted and Gordon struggling to pull a freight train. So to suddenly throw this at us, the idea of Henry being forced to spend the rest of his life being walled up in a tunnel, being forced to waste away as he has to say goodbye to his freedom forever? At least with Cyber Chase, there have been multiple instances of moments with high stakes prior to Clock Like an Egyptian, so its dark turn wouldn't be as much of a surprise as this, even if it isn't as permanent as it seems. Sir Topham Hatt really did plan on having Henry's punishment be permanent. I don't think I need to say anymore, this speaks for itself. I unfortunately haven't seen many episodes of Cars on the Road, only the first 5 so far, though I've been meaning to watch the rest of it. However, even in the first 5 episodes, I found the episode Salt Fever. This episode features Lightning and Mater coming to a place with roads made entirely out of salt, known as Salt Flats, where Mater decides to be a racer and break a record. In order to take part in it, he is given rocket engines, but apparently the race is very dangerous, so Lightning isn't so sure about Mater taking part in it. Oh, but this is a cartoon, he's going to make it in the end. Mater goes faster and faster and ends up breaking the speed limit until... oh no. Are they doing what I think they're doing? They are! Mater actually died in that. I bet you didn't expect that they'd actually kill him off, but luckily Mater is able to cheat death and get back to his body, which keeps it from being higher on the list. Well, that, and because there's not much else to talk about aside from the fact that another car died in it, but I still have to ask, is this supposed to be funny? That is just horrific! The robot's robot from Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, while on the surface doesn't sound completely harmless, also doesn't sound completely harmful either. In this episode, Robotnik's evil robots, Scratch and Grounder, decide to build their own robot. You probably won't know what to expect from an episode like that, but I'm pretty sure whatever you expect wouldn't be something like Robotnik inventing a new device known as a blammo, where the slightest jiggle of it could cause the entire planet to implode. And if you thought that bit of information was only there to prove an example of how powerful it is and doesn't actually impact the plot, then oh boy, you haven't seen anything yet. Remember when I said that Scratch and Grounder created their own robot? Well, the robot eventually decides to run away and decides to take the blammo with him. For some extremely stupid reason. Yeah, they give no real explanation on that. But this adds several layers of tension to the situation. Because the robot doesn't know anything about this device, and is aimlessly running into all kinds of trouble, there's a constant fear of him doing something stupid and setting off the device. The smallest vibration could destroy the entire planet, and it could happen at any second unless Sonic does something about it. But the reason it isn't any higher on the list is because there are multiple points in the episode where I find myself questioning the legitimacy of it. I mean, they say the slightest jiggle could set it off, and yet while carrying the blammo, the robot tunnels through solid rock, falls off a cliff, and gets launched by a geyser, and nothing happens. Heck, throughout the episode, the robot is on the run, and I'd imagine that the vibrations, or the fact that the device is likely being bounced around in the bag, would be enough to set it off. But no, everything is completely fine even with all that happening. Still, the constant fear of the entire planet being imploded is just terrifying. I guess I find myself talking about Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness a bit more often than I thought I would in some of my lists on cartoon episodes, because A Stitch in Time is up next. In this episode, Po finds a bag of some peculiar seeds known as the Shuyang seeds, which give him the power to rewind time. And if you know Po, he decides to use them for fun. But Shifu warns him that this is a bad idea because in the wrong hands, they could have very catastrophic results. Meanwhile, Feng Huang, one of the Jade Palace's most powerful enemies, invades the Jade Palace and attacks Po, Shifu, and the Furious Five, which leads to an intense battle where, get this, Shifu dies. It's not like in the movie where he doesn't actually die and it turns out that it's just building up to a joke. Here, he dies for real. Of course, Po used one of the seeds to rewind time to before Shifu was killed and warned all of them, but that wasn't enough to stop Feng Huang. Remember the Shuyang seeds I was talking about earlier? Well, it turns out that before Po rewinded time, Feng Huang stole one of the seeds and planted it to grow a Shuyang tree, which sprouts a time fruit, which he eats to gain complete control over time itself. And once she gains that power, the first thing she does is stop Shifu and the Furious Five's parents from ever meeting, causing all of them to disappear from existence. But as you'd probably expect, everything is undone at the end, when Po's bag of Shuyang seeds falls, taking Po and Feng Huang back to the beginning of time, where they encounter the Great Shuyang Tree, which gives Po another chance to set things right, and sends Feng Huang into oblivion. only for her to somehow come back in the first 5. But yeah, dark stuff. The Little Mermaid cartoon seems pretty lighthearted overall. Whenever there's anything at stake, it usually doesn't get any worse than one character almost gets killed. Which, yes, is dark, but that's extremely common in cartoons, so I'm pretty sure most of us are used to it. The episode Resigned to It, however, tells a completely different story. At first glance, it doesn't seem like there's much at stake. Just Sebastian quitting his job because he feels left out because King Triton won't tell him something. Not necessarily good news that Sebastian feels this way, but not really anything dark. So, what is this news that Triton is keeping from Sebastian? Turns out that there is this new threat called the Red Tide, which destroys everyone and everything in its path. And eventually, it is headed towards Atlantica and all of the innocent merfolk. The dark aspect of this catastrophe is even further emphasized by the creepy red glow it gives off whenever it is nearby. And even King Triton, the all-powerful king of the ocean, who wields a trident capable of doing all sorts of impossible things, is completely powerless against it. So if even he can't do anything about it, then you know that the merfolk are in big trouble. Which makes it even more insulting when it is revealed that the Red Tide is actually a colony of toxic red bugs that were blissfully unaware of how toxic they are. All the destruction they were guilty of was just an accident caused by their own stupidity and ignorance. You've gotta be kidding. I mean, I guess it makes sense since it's based off something in real life, but it's still an insulting twist. But whether the destruction they caused was intentional or not, the threat of a danger that travels in unpredictable patterns and consumes everyone in its path is some pretty messed up stuff. Warning! The following entry contains depictions of suicide and incest stereotypes. If you are sensitive to that, please skip to the next entry. Again, a Christmas episode on a Halloween countdown? What is this madness? Well, since the Christmas episode is on here, and it is technically still winter at the time of making this, hopefully you guys will be forgiving of me doing a Halloween countdown this late, right? Whatever. Anyways, if I may make a confession, I actually knew about the dark elements of Road to the North Pole before I first saw it. As a matter of fact, I hadn't even watched it until very recently, and I mainly just watched it for the sake of including it on this list. But hey, I never said they had to be surprising for me. Now, to those of you who are familiar with Family Guy would know that this show has a lot of dark humor in it. So an episode being dark should come off as no surprise. Unless, of course, it manages to be dark even for Family Guy standards. Sure, the fact that Stewie wants to go to the North Pole to kill Santa Claus for turning him down at the mall is about as dark as you'd expect Family Guy to get. But once they actually get there, that's when the dark stuff gets more surprising. The first thing they notice is that instead of being all colorful and happy like Santa's Workshop is in most Christmas specials, Santa's Workshop turns out to be a very depressing looking factory. But that's just how it looks on the outside. Surely it's much better on the inside, right? Well, that couldn't be any further from the truth. Brian and Stewie soon find out that Santa is now completely depressed and suicidal. Wait, what? You heard that right. It is revealed that Santa has been completely overworked because of how much the world's population has grown, and because of how many demands they have to answer year after year. So much that it causes him to be in such a horrible condition that it makes him look like this. It's made even worse if you take a certain line from his song into account, which states that he looks like that at the age of 28. And it's not much better for the elves because they are all inbred. Okay, in case there are any inbred people watching this video that may get offended by this, don't blame me, blame the episode for portraying them like this. Anyways, these inbred elves have very crippling conditions and die much easier than normal people. And when they die, their bodies get eaten by the reindeer, who, by the way, instead of being like they are in most Christmas specials, here they are feral and demonic and look like something straight out of Watership Down. And in one scene, in order to get them to move, Stewie even has to cut off one of their arms in a very slow way. I literally had to look away when I first saw this part. And you know about that song I just mentioned? Yeah, this episode gives us a song about how much Santa and all of his elves have to suffer through. Now, most Christmas songs are all happy and cheerful, but this is not like any of those. Man, this special is hardcore to have a dark Christmas song. Even when I knew about the disturbing premise of this episode, I was still horrified by what I saw. To think, all of this is coming out of a Christmas episode. You know, the kinds of episodes that are normally all happy and lighthearted and usually don't have much higher stakes than people not getting presents. But the reason this isn't any higher is because, like I said, this is Family Guy, so dark premises are to be expected. Trust me, if this wasn't the list of the most surprisingly dark episodes, this would have arguably been a lot higher. But even Family Guy doesn't usually go this hard with its dark tones. A dark episode from the Peanut specials? That's impossible. A franchise like this seems completely harmless to the point where you wouldn't expect something like this. Okay, why do we even keep up with the act? I'm sure some of you know exactly what episode I'm referring to. That being Why Charlie Brown Why. It seems like a normal Charlie Brown episode, and it does have some cute gags such as Snoopy trying to stow away to school. Even the music that plays during the opening credits is all happy and upbeat, making it sound like there's no need to worry. So what's the problem? Well, Linus has a friend named Janice, and it turns out she isn't feeling very well. So it's just a normal case of someone getting sick at school. It can't be too bad, right? Nope. It turns out that she has leukemia, which is a form of cancer. To hear that a show like this would delve into a topic this serious? I can't think of many instances where a Peanut special has actually dealt with a life or death matter, so I bet you'll be very shocked by the fact that this is of all things, a Peanuts episode. Now, the only way to treat her condition is to perform chemotherapy, and this one requires her to lose all her hair, which eventually leads to one kid bullying her for it. Imagine getting bullied for having a fatal disease. That is just plain messed up. But sadly, that is the cold and harsh reality of the world we live in. And you can tell how messed up it is by the fact that it causes Linus, a normally calm kid, to snap at him. But at least the bully apologizes when Linus stands up to him. And Janice does make a full recovery in the end, which keeps the Century from being high on the list, but not by much. Since even if she does recover, you'd never think a cartoon like this would go in this direction. Tom and Jerry is a timeless classic that I think it's safe to assume that at least 99% of the world's population is familiar with. How could a beloved classic like this be dark? Oh, you'd be surprised. Those of you who saw my list of the worst episodes of good cartoons are probably expecting Blue Cat Blues, but when we're talking about surprisingly dark episodes, I'd say that another episode has it beat. That episode in particular being The Two Mouseketeers. This episode features a kind of slapstick you'd expect from Tom and Jerry. Doesn't seem like it gets much worse than that. And I might also add that the whole Musketeer theme of the episode makes me think of how silly and over-the-top Mickey Mouse's take on the Three Musketeers story was. So, what could happen to warrant it being on here? I bet those of you who have seen this episode know exactly what I'm talking about. Tom actually dies in this episode. It's not like in Salt Fever where it's only temporary and he manages to cheat death. Okay, I guess this could be considered temporary considering he's alive in the next episode. But even still, the fact that he actually dies, all for failing to go to feast. Good to know that this king isn't above animal abuse. Ordinarily on Tom and Jerry, I like to root for Jerry out of the two, but this episode makes it kinda hard to when we know that Tom will actually have his head chopped off if he loses. And when it actually happens, Jerry and Nibbles, while they seem to show a little bit of sympathy for him, they just shrug it off almost instantly. That is just plain shocking. Even though it is stated early on that Tom will be executed if he fails, all the humorous slapstick will probably make you forget about that, so if you did forget about it, then this ending will take you almost completely by surprise. The Late Philip J. Fry is an episode where Fry is supposed to take Leela to Cavern on the Green for her birthday dinner, but he isn't able to make it because Professor Farnsworth is making him test his new time machine, which can only go forward in time. Yeah, I don't see how this could possibly backfire, but it ends up malfunctioning, and so Fry, Bender, and Farnsworth end up being sent into the year 10,000. I already feel uncomfortable when characters are sent this far into the future, but let's just ignore my bias towards these kind of stories. These guys are completely stranded thousands of years ahead of where they're supposed to be, and away from all of their friends, who are all dead by now. And they only keep going further and further into the future by the minute, where they even see that New York has been destroyed and that humanity was enslaved. And we even get a Planet of the Apes homage. Lovely. And they see more and more dark stuff happening as they keep going further and further into the future, such as the Second Ice Age, giraffes enslaving all of humanity, a robot apocalypse, until they finally get to the literal end of the world, where all life has died off, leaving nothing but a barren wasteland. So, with nowhere left to go, they go forward in time into the destruction of the universe. But sure enough, the destruction of the entire universe ends up causing a second Big Bang, allowing them to keep going forward in time back to their respective time, so it's as if this never happened. But all of that horrible stuff that our heroes saw on their journey is still dark enough to traumatize anyone. When the Alolan Saga of the Pokémon anime was revealed, a lot of us were in doubt about it because of how it spends more time at school, and because of how dumb Ash looks in it. but after a while, I decided that maybe I could give it a try. And I'm glad I did, because despite those annoyances I listed, it's pretty enjoyable overall, especially the characters. And even though it spends most of its time at school, at least the journey part of it is still there, albeit not as prominent as it's been in the previous series, but still there. Though I don't regard it as one of the better ones, since there are several points where the show goes completely bonkers, even for Pokemon anime standards, and rarely takes itself seriously. Sure, there are some exceptions, like with the Lily's family story arc, but overall this is the last Pokemon anime saga that you'd expect to find a dark episode in. All the more reason as to why Showering the World with Love takes the number 3 spot on the list. Apparently this episode has the promise of the most beautiful meteor shower you've ever seen, in the form of Pokemon called Minior and their different colored cores. And yeah, it really is just beautiful to look at. So, what's so dark about it? Well, throughout the episode, Sophocles mentions that he's seen a Minior shower like this before, but he couldn't remember what happened after it. Well, by the end of the episode, Sophocles finally remembers that because the Minior are no longer protected by their shells, they all fade away after. Yep, this beautiful scene ends with what is basically a mass genocide. Now, some could say that maybe they didn't actually die, but that they simply just returned to their home. Well, that may seem like a possibility, but take a look at its Pokédex entry for its core form in Pokemon Moon. It is said that if its core stays exposed, it will soon die off. It's possible that it may survive if it's put into a Pokeball quickly enough. That sounds a lot like what's happening in this episode. They're not protected by their shells, and so they all disappear. And if the Pokédex entry is anything to go by, then yeah, we can assume that they actually died. Seeing a normally crazy and over-the-top saga of the anime take this dark of a turn this suddenly is the last thing that you'd expect. Just Desserts from Fairly OddParents. An episode about sweets, such as candy and ice cream and stuff like that. What could possibly be dark about that? Oh, you have no idea. This episode's premise is that Timmy is sick of eating nothing but healthy food, so he wishes that there were only desserts, no other kinds of food. So you can expect that everyone loves that. And I bet you can also expect that it'll eventually lead to everyone getting fat and out of shape. But were you expecting everyone to get so fat that it completely throws off the Earth's rotation and causes it to be sent flying towards the sun? Even a show where the world has been put in danger on more than one occasion, would you ever have expected that from an episode about sweets? Trust me, clogged arteries are going to be the least of everyone's problems here. You expect this to be a comfort episode, not something like this! If that isn't the absolute worst way to die, I don't know what is. Being slowly burned alive as the temperatures rapidly increase without stopping, with everyone being completely powerless to stop it, until the planet finally hits the sun and everyone burns to death. Can't imagine a much worse fate than that, and this is going to happen to everyone if Timmy doesn't find a way to unwish the wish. Now, to some, this may sound like your generic everyday world in danger type of episode, but for an episode about sweets, this doesn't sugarcoat anything. Before we get to number 1, here are the honorable mentions. Yachi from the Baymax Plus show. Ladies and gentlemen, my number 16 choice, because unlike in the previous episodes, Baymax basically dies in it. It's not permanent though, for Hero does find and revive him in the next episode, and the reason it just barely missed the list is because I feel like emotionless robot lives don't hold as much value as the lives of people and animals, but his life still matters, which is why this episode came close. The Legends of the X, Y, and Z from Pokemon. When Alexa and Sycamore come across the statue of a woman, that seems harmless until it's revealed that she is actually a person who got turned into stone by Yveltal, and that statue is her petrified body that was never freed from it. That just freaks me out! Shattered from Sonic Prime. The thought of Sonic being sent to a post-apocalyptic version of Green Hill Zone would definitely warrant a spot on the list. But again, these are surprisingly dark episodes. And the trailer showed the post-apocalyptic city, so while this is dark, it isn't really surprisingly dark unless you came into the show not knowing what to expect. My Friend Patty from SpongeBob. The fact that it features a sentient Krabby Patty that actually wants to be eaten. I mean, it makes sense since he's a sandwich, but this is still twisted to see him be suicidal, especially since he actually gets his wish in the end. It probably would have been on here if not for one SpongeBob episode that I feel deserves its spot more, which you guys will find out really, really soon. Spongehenge. As soon as I planned this countdown, I knew there could be no other choice for the number 1 spot on this list. You might have seen this coming if you watched my good episodes ruined by terrible endings list, but I will not deny that I think this deserves to be at the top. It seems harmless at first, even though there's a strong wind blowing through Bikini Bottom, the worst it does is just blow away someone's food and wake up SpongeBob. It even blows through his hose to create a happy tune that attracts jellyfish, making it seem like this is going to be a pretty fun and lighthearted episode. But over time, the episode starts to get a bit more discomforting as the jellyfish start to interfere with his everyday life. But how bad could that be? Well, now that he can no longer work at the Krusty Krab, or see Patrick, or do anything anymore, he is forced to run away from civilization. Being forced to isolate yourself from everyone you care about, that's gotta be horrible for him. Oh, but it's only temporary. Things will go back to normal sooner or later. Well, wouldn't you know, he is forced to stay away from civilization so long that it causes him to grow a full beard. That could very easily imply that he was gone for months, or maybe even years. And by the time he finally gets back, he finds out that the town has been completely destroyed by the strong winds. Everything SpongeBob knows and loves is all gone. The entire town has been destroyed, all of his friends are probably dead, and considering this is a Planet of the Apes reference, we can probably assume that might not even be a fraction of the damage that was caused by this catastrophe. And the worst part is that nothing gets fixed. Seriously! At least most of the other entries on this list had happy endings, and even the ones that didn't have happy endings didn't even come close to being this dark. Even One Course Meal, despite its needlessly dark premise, at least Plankton was no longer suicidal by the ending, and the worst that happened at the end was him just being scared away one last time. This episode, on the other hand, makes One Course Meal look completely tame in comparison. Just the horrific aftermath of everything that's happened in this episode is so dark that I just couldn't call it anything else other than what I think is the most surprisingly dark episode ever.